Now presentation this evening. We are very pleased to be welcoming another one of Aspen's female mayors. Helen Clanderud was mayor in Aspen from 2003 to 2007. No, I lied. 2001 to 2007. And see, I thought you were mayor when I moved here in '99, but I guess I forgot that part. It seems like she was here in the early part of my being here in Aspen, and an interesting growth period in Aspen's history. And as soon as she gets wired up for sound, literally, we will have an opportunity to hear a little bit more about her story, which is funny. It seems some parallels. Yes. As I was sitting here going, wow. Huh. A lot of parallels to Mrs. Homeyer. Mm-hmm. Right, so ladies and gentlemen, without it is our great pleasure to have Mrs. Helen Clanderud here this evening.
Thank you. My pleasure to be here. Our paths somewhat crossed. I moved here in 1971 when Eve was mayor of Aspen. And I moved here from Denver, where I had lived for about 7 years. I was a clinical social worker. I am a clinical social worker, and I worked at Fort Logan Mental Health Center. And things were changing in the mental health world due to the community mental health centers. And my favorite work is with crisis cases, acute cases, and I suppose character disorders, which are kind of exciting. And Fort Logan was changing. They were going to remove patients from Pueblo, which was the other state hospital, and move them back into the communities from which they came. Now think about that. There are people who had been in Pueblo for 30-some years. These people were institutionalized, and they were going to bring them back to their communities. And I either don't have the patience or the skill to work with the chronic patients who certainly need the support and need the treatment, but I'm not the one to deliver it. So Fort Logan's program was changing. We had a very avant-garde, cutting-edge program. And I kept complaining, as I want to do, my son will vouch for this, about one thing or another. I was complaining that the program was going to change, and I think I was, it was like salmon going upstream. I was not going to change anything. And one day the division chief in an all-hospital meeting said to me, he essentially told me to shut up. And in my quiet way to myself, I said, I'm leaving. Anyway, I looked around Denver to see if I could find another position that interested me. That wasn't the case. I had 4 very young children. I was divorced by this time, living in Park Hill. And the former head of education at Fort Logan had come to Aspen a year or two before, Sam Schiff. Does anyone remember Sam Schiff? Dr. Sam Schiff. And he was the director of a grassroots mental health clinic that had started here in 1969. Again, an overlap with Eve Homeyer's time here. And also one of the founders and one of the most active persons getting this started, and one of the most active board members was a woman by the name of Claire Sanderson. Does that name ring a bell?
Yeah, sure.
Claire was a staunch Democrat, as staunch a Democrat as Eve was a staunch Republican at that time. And I would have to say they were the 2 political grand dames in the city of Aspen when I moved here. Certainly not on the same side. At any rate, I also wanted to leave Denver for other reasons. We were in the car all the time. We lived in Park Hill, which is in northeast Denver. I worked at Fort Logan, which was in southwest Denver. And my children were in a Montessori school in southeast Denver. And we had an outreach program that I was working in. My catchment area, or our catchment area for the Denver 1 team that I was on, and then later the Denver 5 team, was northwest Denver. So in the course of a day, this was sort of our life. And I felt that being in an automobile was no way for children to grow up. And We also, it was at a time, there were busy streets there. I had to keep saying no all the time. No, you can't go out of the yard. No, you can't do this. And I really did not feel this was the kind of upbringing that I wanted my children to have. It was my birthday, and I came home from work and picked up my newsletter from my social work newsletter, the one from the local chapter. And there was a job advertisement in there about a mental health clinic in Aspen, Colorado. And I knew who the director was because I had known him at Fort Logan. Anyway, I went to a birthday party that night and found myself saying to people, when I move to Aspen, you'll have to come and visit me. And in fact, that's exactly what happened. I applied for the job, and I did get it, and so I moved to Aspen with my children right before Labor Day in 1971. And as I said, E. Fulmeyer was mayor. I was working in the clinic as a social worker. The public school system at that time had raised funds to hire a school social worker because all the hippies had come to town, and the local community, the local parents were very concerned about their own children growing up like these young people who were hanging out in the park, sleeping in the park, who dressed funny, and the physicians in town had no idea how to treat their drug-related problems. They had no idea what these kids were taking. So Claire Sanderson, who was a master's level nurse with a degree from Yale, Art Daly, who was a lawyer at Holland and Hart at the time, Bob Swearingen, who was I believe he was an orthopod physician in town, Frank Harvey, who was the minister at the community church, got together and decided that they needed a mental health clinic in town. And that was in 1969. And there was Colorado West, which was down valley, and they decided, as Aspenites often do, that they were going to start their own clinic, that they were not going to be part of another clinic. So that's how Touchstone Mental Health Clinic came into being. So I came here, I worked part-time for the clinic, and I worked part-time with the school district. And what I didn't know, it had taken them some time to hire me, and what I didn't realize was that there was a severe funding crunch. I did not get a paycheck for 6 months. And fortunately, my family was able to help us. Also, when I moved here, I owned a house in Denver, I wasn't sure we really were going to like it. I mean, it seemed like the ideal place, but who knew if you were going to like it or not. And so I was going to rent something. Well, with 4 children and myself and the amount of space that we would need, and this will sound funny too, in 1971, rentals for 3-4 bedroom condo would have been $600 a month, which was way too high. And I found out, I mean, that's a joke today, but it was way too high then. And I found out that I could buy something and my mortgage payments would be only $400 and something a month. So that seemed like a no-brainer to me. So I called my father and told him I was going to buy this house. It was $59,000. And he said, "Did you lose your mind?" And I said no, and unfortunately my father's not alive today to see what that investment turned out to be. I still live in that house, same place we lived in 1971. About a year after I got that job, Sam Schiff left and went into private practice. And one of the things you need to know is at that time, other than a psychiatrist who came here in the summer from Chicago with the summer group that came with the music and whatever, there was no mental health care, treatment, available resources in the community until Touchstone Mental Health Clinic started. Sam went out into private practice, and I became the director of the clinic. And what happened over the next several years were the people started coming to town, psychologists, other social workers, and they'd come in, spend about a year in the clinic, and then go out and start their own practices. We were a nonprofit, and one day I told my board, I said, "This is ridiculous." I said, "I am willing," and we saw people on a sliding scale, so you didn't have the funds to afford treatment. We saw you anyway, and whatever you could pay is what you paid. I said, "You're knocking yourselves out to raise money for this clinic. I said, I can go into private practice, continue this same, function under the same philosophy, and there will be treatment in this community. To my amazement, and I think this board did something I've never seen done before, and I certainly haven't done since, they went out and did a survey in the community to make certain that service would be available to the people who needed it if they closed the clinic. And they found that to be true, so they did. So I went into private practice, and this was in 1976. I continued to do that for several years. And in 1980, I was at a Sunday concert. Herman Edel was mayor of Aspen at that time. Does anyone remember Herman? Yeah. Some of you do, yeah, okay. So Herman was mayor of Aspen at that time, and during the intermission, I was out on the grounds, and he came up to me and he said, that happened to be the year, and by the way, Eve Holmeyer was chair of the Pitkin County Home Rule Charter Committee. And they had just approved the Pitkin County Home Rule Charter, or the commissioners had, and we went from 3 commissioners to 5 commissioners. And interestingly enough, and again, Eve's stories and mine and our tenures are really intertwined. One of the reasons there was an interest in getting 5 commissioners was because people in the community were tired of the Joe Edwards, Dwight Shellman, and Michael Kinsley triumvirate. Now, depending on your politics, you may be happy with that, but there were people who weren't. And they decided if they went to 5 commissioners, they could perhaps bring, other opinions in. So Herman says to me, the 1980 election would have been the first election that there were 5 commissioners. Herman says, why don't you run for county commissioner? And I went back in and said to my friend who I was at the concert with, I said, you're not going to believe what just happened. And I'd been involved in politics before. I wrote my first letter to the editor when I was 12 because they were going to close a lake where we went ice skating every winter, but it really got smelly and sort of not unattractive in the summer. And I wrote a letter to the paper saying they can't close this lake because we all went skating there. They didn't close the lake. I doubt that my letter had anything to do with it, but that sort of gives you, grandiose ideas. I came of age to vote when John Kennedy ran. And for anyone who was there at that time, you know what a high that was in political life. And there were a lot of people energized and who got involved. And I think we saw what happened after that in terms of civil rights, women's rights, and so forth. That was a very politically energized, active period of time. So I was in graduate school at the University of Nebraska at that time and was part of the Student Democratic Party. So that's my interest in politics went back quite a ways. So the next day after this concert, I went to Boulder. I was on the Colorado Children's Commission, or Juvenile Commission. And Ruben Valdez, who was the head of Department of Social Services, as it was called at that time in the state of Colorado, gave the luncheon address. And he said, if those of you in human services care about what's happening, why aren't more of you running for elective office? And I thought, okay. So I came back, asked my friend Susan Michael, who was a city councilwoman at the time, whether Herman was putting me on or whether this was a legitimate request, and would I have backing if I did it. And I ran. There were 6 of us in the district I was in, and I won, and I was the first woman county commissioner in Pitkin County. And I would joke that was in 1980, and I took office in 81, and I said it took 100 years from the time that Pitkin County was carved out of Gunnison County to become its own county that a woman had held elective office. And Eve, of course, had already been mayor, so, we were making some progress. I first ran for mayor in 1999. And Rachel Richards, who was the second woman mayor in the city of Aspen, won that election by 14 votes. And on election night, I said to myself, I'm running in 2001, which I did, and I won, and I served 3 terms and was term limited in 2007. I ran for mayor because a kind of similar thing happened. A lot of people were saying, oh, I forgot, I left something out. I left several things out, I guess. I served 2 terms as county commissioner. And the issues that I was most interested in, which was establishing a combined transportation system, because the county had its own transportation system, city had its own transportation system, and we were successful in merging the 2 and creating RAFTA. And Eve was a major player in that. We appointed her to the task force to come back with a proposal to have RAFTA. So RAFTA was formed. I also wanted to see a new jail. Any of you remember what the jail looked like before the early 80s? I mean, we were facing the possibility of it being declared. It was what they refer to as an unconstitutional jail. And at that particular time, Jefferson County was told that if they didn't replace their jail, they were going to have to use their open space funds to build a new one. So getting a new jail was important to me. Again, we called upon Eve Holmeyer to chair this task force because we knew she could get things done. And there had been a failed election before, but that election, the next time, passed once again. And there were other people on that committee, but I credit Eve with being a major player in getting that done. So after my 2nd term as county commissioner, I felt that the things I was interested in here had been accomplished. And I got a call from Tom Glass, who then was our state senator, who was not going to run again, asking if I would run for the state senate. So I did in 1986. I lost that election to a Republican. And because my children were away at school, I didn't need to be here. I could do anything I wanted. I didn't have to be, I wasn't here. And I could either rebuild my private practice or do whatever. And my mother went to a nursing home that year, and I spent probably in total about 6 months traveling back and forth. Anyway, I decided, wouldn't it be nice if I could spend more time with her? Because I didn't know how much longer she'd be with us. So I thought, I'll go crazy in Lincoln, Nebraska. We've talked about Iowa. I come from Nebraska. Takes good Midwestern women to do this. Anyway, so I thought, what will I do and not lose my mind in Lincoln, Nebraska, having lived in Aspen, Colorado for the period of time I had. And I said, I know, I'll go to law school. So I did. And I spent my 3 years in law school. My mother was still alive. She didn't die until 1996. And I came back. I intended to practice law here. And so I came back to Colorado. And I clerked for a judge in Denver for about a year. Decided it was time to practice. Came back and worked in Nick McGrath's office here. That was a bit difficult, if anyone knew Nick. I had known Nick for years, thought I could handle it, and I decided one day I really didn't want to. And then I went to work for Catherine Thalberg at Explore Booksellers, and that's sort of the female version of, both these people are deceased, so I shouldn't speak ill of the dead, but Catherine was a tough boss too. And anyway, after that I decided, no, I'm not, and I was still trying to get time off to go back and visit my mother because she was still alive at that time. And I had to fight with these people to get, or felt I did, to get the time off to go visit her. So that's when I decided I was going to be on my own time. In the 6 years I was mayor and I was term limited, I guess the things I'm most proud of is, one is, I continued with the RAFTA, and I served with Eve on the RAFTA board, and she truly was probably the staunchest and the most admired mass transit supporter in this entire valley, and responsible for much of the progress that RAFTA has made, and of course where it is today is way beyond where it started. If you notice behind Ruby Park where the buses pull in, that's Eve's Way, if you've noticed that. And that's named for her. And we're able to dedicate that during her lifetime so that, and honor her in that fashion. I'm very proud of the Canary Initiative, which, no one person does these things alone. It takes a village, and it certainly takes a majority vote on any elected board in order to get passed. But the Canary Initiative, which is Aspen, which was one of the very early, community programs put into place to address global warming and climate change. We were trying to save Smuggler Mountain, Smuggler Mountain that Wilk Wilkinson owned at the time, and we were trying to save the ISIS Theater. And we were successful in doing both, so that is now open space forever, and the Aspen has a theater which it almost lost. It came very close to losing. And that was a public-private partnership. Smuggler Mountain was a city-county partnership, also with the MAA and Aspen Valley Land Trust involved. To me, this community is about its people. That's what makes it special, and will always make it special. And for all it's been through for over 100 years, and its ups and downs, it's amazing. The character and the spirit of the people who live here, whether then or now, are great. There is no spirit like it anywhere. I have never experienced a community anywhere where the people are as involved and care as much about their community as they do here. So I am honored and privileged to have served as your mayor if you live in this community. I loved it. I miss the action. And I don't need to be in elective office, but I do miss the action. So thank you for this opportunity that you've given me to share my story with you and in this community. And Eve was a role model for me. And at the point, I wanted to say one thing about her. At the point she decided she no longer was going to be a Republican, she and Claire Sanderson became very close friends. They were a delightful duo together. If there was any kind of political event, they were both there. So, thank you.
And it's
not bad.
Starting to drizzle a little bit because I don't want to rush us out of here without getting an opportunity to ask questions. So we have one down front. One moment.
How did you get to Denver?
I grew up in Nebraska. I went to college at St. Mary's in Notre Dame in South Bend, Indiana. I came back and got my master's degree at the University of Nebraska in Lincoln. And I got married, and my husband, who was a dentist, owed the Navy 3 years because they had helped put him through dental school. And so we spent 3 years in the Navy in California. And he was from Colorado, and he opened his dental practice in Denver. That's how we got there.
Do we have any other questions for Helen this evening? Kathy?
Can you talk a little bit more about your first experience as county commissioner and coming in, as you say, sort of after the Edwards-Kingsley triumvirate?
You know, it was very interesting. There were 5 of us. That body was made up of George Mattson, Bob Child, Tom Blake, Michael Kinsley, and me. Okay, in fact, it was very interesting, that election that year in '80. Dick Keenest was sheriff and was elected, and the headline said, Keenest, Kinsley, and Clandrud. So it was on 3 Ks. Anyway, you know what was interesting, and it was very different then. The ski company had a PAC. We were interviewed by any number of different groups. to see whether, they were going to advise their constituencies to vote for us or not. Every single one of us was a controlled growth advocate. Now, maybe at different levels in some cases, but a controlled growth. That is still the case today. That controlled growth in Aspen and Pitkin County has held up since it was first established by Dwight, Sandy Stuller, who was the county attorney at the time, and Dwight and Joe. So that goes back a long way, and it's still. It was different. There was a lawsuit pending at that time on Hunter Creek. It was Silver King then, and the commissioners were not going to let anything happen there. They sued. We settled. That lawsuit got settled. Silver King got built as Hunter Creek. It's affordable housing. It was a kinder time, I think. Dwight and Joe were brilliant. Sandy Stuller was brilliant, but they had pretty harsh attitude. I mean, it was kind of, you got the feeling sometimes it's our way or the highway, and the highway, which is still the highway. But anyway, that I think that changed, and I think the 5 had something to do with it because we were kind of, Snowmass with Tom Blake had its own representative. Bob Child was down Valley, and that the districts were split up in a little bit different parcels. So I think that was a benefit.
Interesting. Hey, Val.
Do you see yourself having political ambitions going forward?
I'm still. I think you're born with this gene, and whether it's healthy or not. I'm still involved, but not in that way. I'm the chair of the Public Affairs Committee for the ACRA. So, I've not left it behind, but it's a different kind of role, and right now that works well. One thing I want to say, and this is how things have changed. When I was the director of Touchstone, there was an organization in the Valley called the Aspen Valley Improvement Association, which funded different things in the Valley. Anyway, I went on different occasions to the City Council, to the Board of County Commissioners, asking for funds for Touchstone Mental Health Clinic. And I think other organizations probably did too. It was not forthcoming. And now you've got a tax that anywhere from 60 to 70% of the electorate has voted for in the county to fund health and human services. And the city has funded them as well. I mean, it's gone a long way. So I don't know, do I? I would not. I could have been, I could have been.
A contender.
Dick Lamb said years ago, never say no. So
And you know what? I'm afraid that at that we really ought to move inside, at least to continue the conversation if we want. Thank you so much, Helen. I really appreciate it.